强劲的发展实力。随着5G 时代、万物互联时代到来，新形势下的安全问题也日益严峻和紧迫。以5G 为例，从1G 到4G， 移动通信实现了海量用户的互联。5G 和4G 相比，峰值速率提高了30倍，用户体验数据率提升了10倍，频谱效率提升了3倍。5G 不仅比4G 更快，它支持的业务类型也更多，应用范围更广。然而 5G 对安全来说也是双刃剑，它实现了计算与通信的融合，基于大数据人工智能的网络运维，减少了人为的差错。智能化的监控有利于提高网络的安全防御水平。但是 5G 的虚拟化和软件定义能力，以及它的协议的互联网化、开放化，也引入了新的安全风险，使网络有可能遭到更多的渗透和攻击。我们在为 5G 带来想象空间欢欣鼓舞的同时，也必须正视 5G 带来的安全挑战。以 5G 为依托，被大家看作是互联网发展下一方向的工业互联网，也同样面临着极大的安全威胁。工业互联网的发展模糊了物理世界和虚拟世界的界限，由此引发的网络攻击往往会造成比过去更严重的影响。在刚刚过去的7月，我们看到澳大利亚、美国纽约都相继出现了大面积的断网停电的重大事故。越来越多的事实表明，安全威胁已经从网络空间蔓延到大型制造、电力、交通、医疗等现代社会命脉行业中，而这些行业无不关系到国家的稳定和群众的利益。因此，工业互联网需要采取严格的安全防范技术。工业互联网的安全需要管理与技术发展并重，企业的安全要与行业的安全、社会的安全实现威胁情报共享与协同联动。工业互联网24小时永远在线，让工业互联网的安全工作永远在路上。如何实现公共厂商、网络信息安全企业、政府部门、运营商互相的大数据协同，获得实时威胁情报和风险通报及解决方案，利用外部力量帮助企业提升工业互联网的安全防御，这都是工业互联网亟待解决的核心命题。互联网的安全问题是国际化的问题，需要加强国际合作，维护全球共同的互联网的安全生态。网络安全已经是国家、社会、企业乃至个人绕不开的重要命题。各个领域以及每个个体携手共建互联网安全大生态，发展网络安全行业是当务之急。我们看到，在本届互联网安全大会上，国内外网络安全知名企业、中小企业和业内专家非常多，分论坛的议题也十分丰富，覆盖了政策与法规、工业互联网安全、城市安全、5G 安全、漏洞挖掘、网络安全人才培养等重要议题。在这里，我期待全球网络安全领域的专家学者能在这里分享先进经验，碰撞新的思想。期待这场大会能激荡更多关于网络安全未来的思考和见解，共同建立网络安全的大生态。最后，预祝本届大会取得圆满成功，谢谢大家。
好，谢谢，感谢邬贺铨院士对于网络安全国际化的深刻思考，感谢您的精彩演讲。我们都知道，网络作为陆地、海洋、天空、太空之外的第5空间，网络安全是全球各个国家都非常关注的话题。下面让我们掌声有请出以色列国会现任外交与国防委员会主席、奥斯卡提名纪录片看门人主讲人艾维迪希特先生。提名纪录片看门人主讲人艾维迪希特先生的主旨演讲题目是“以色列与网络安全”主题演讲，让我们掌声有请。 Now, please welcome current chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, interviewee in the guest speakers, an Oscar-nominated documentary in 2013, Mr. Avi Gicher, to stage for a speech on the topic of Israel and cybersecurity. Now, please welcome.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here at the 7th conference. You know, 7 in Jewish history is a very blessed number. And, 7 days in a week, it was the first Israeli Jewish startup 3,500 years ago, and it still works. The reason why I'm trying to speak about Israel as a laboratory of international cybersecurity is on the map. You can see that's the Middle East, the large Middle East. The red indicates the state of Israel, its real proportions. Even just to write the name Israel, you need to borrow part of the Mediterranean Sea to have the space to write the name. All the green indicates the Arab countries. There are some Muslim countries around us, like Iran. And Israel is 22,000 square kilometers, day and night. 9 million people. But pretty strong in cyber defense or in cyber issues. And that's why we've turned to be and to become a global lab for security, cybersecurity, and due to the experience, we are trying to share it with other countries, of course here with this conference, with China, and I really hope that the conference will be blessed with the 7th, as I said at the beginning. The question is, when cyber issues and cyber defense start interesting and to be interesting for some people, and who are those people? Who is in concern about cyber defense? Let's draw a scenario. A hacker breaks into 1 billion bank accounts, and he takes $1, just $1, from each bank account once a year. Is the bank going to feel about it? No. Are you as clients are going to complain about $1 missing once a year? I'm sure not. After 3 years, the hacker has $3 billion in his pocket, plus a good appetite. And he decides to move from $1 per month into $1 a year into $1 per month. Is any bank going to feel $1 missing from any bank account? Not at all. Are you as clients going to complain about $1 missing in your pocket or in your bank account once a month? I'm not, I'm sure you're not. And the hacker, after 1 year, he has $12 billion in his pocket, plus $3 billion from last 3 years. But if the same hacker breaks into the bank safe and takes $1 million, the bank is going to drive crazy. Not because the 1 million, but because its reputation. Because everybody knows very well that nobody will put money in any bank if a hacker succeeds to bypass its walls and to take money from its safe. You know, global crimes, cyber crimes today, estimated by more than $400 billion a year. Drugs, who has a history of hundreds of years, has a bit more than the $400 billion damage a year globally. In Israel, we normally used to start building walls of security after catastrophe. In 1968, the first Israeli plane was hijacked by Palestinian terrorists to Algeria. Since then, we have guards on every Israeli flight. When Iran and Hezbollah destroyed the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires in 1992 with a car bomb driven by a suicide bomber, and 30 people got killed, 100 got injured, we started to build a different modus operandi how to protect Israeli embassies worldwide. When Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in 1995, since then we are protecting our VIPs, leaders, and guests in a total different way. When we've identified cyber as a threat, even before the word cyber was mentioned, we decided in Israel to build an authority to confront the threats coming from cyber before we suffer any catastrophe. And the principle is very clear to all of us. The more you are digitized, the more you are computerized, the more you are vulnerable for cyber threats. And cyber defense is, first and foremost, has to protect the country's basic infrastructure, and banks are just one example. Electricity, power system, water, transportation, ground transportation, and aviation. Try to imagine that the control tower around, let's say, New York, there are 3 airports. If the control tower in those 3 airports are going to be blocked by a hacker, it's going to be a catastrophe. And of course, health as a infrastructure, as a very basic infrastructure in the country, strategic infrastructure, let alone the security agencies in every single country, Israel, China, and any other country. But here lies the catch. Who's going to decide the standard of cybersecurity? Which means you need to legislate it. You need a law to say 4 elements, critical elements. First, what should be done and by whom? Second, who checks that the agency or the organization is doing and fulfilling the guidelines? Third, who is going to give the budget for it? And fourth, what's the timetable schedule for making it happen? What are the milestones that you put for every project? I'm sure that we all understand that if you don't do it, by the way, it's in any decision relevant. If you don't have those 4 elements in any decision, it's not a serious decision. When it goes, for example, if we just take one element from the cyber critical infrastructure, if you take just the power center, electricity, whether it's power production or transmission, we all understand that electrical turbines are stopped working when it reaches a degree of temperature that above it it's dangerous to the turbine. If a hacker just penetrates in those computers and creates the illusion that the temperature is low, while practically it's going up, the turbine is going to explode. And we all understand what does it mean to live in a country, a small country like Israel, or a huge country like China. It's a catastrophe. It's an immediate catastrophe, and it has very strong indirect influences. Just try to imagine China or any other country with no elevators, or elevators are based only on generators. I can assure you that the economy is going to suffer for a very, very long time. Of course, it's going to create a chaos in many other fields and infrastructures like water and any other issues. Chaos. So how do we deal with it? I know that in the era where we are dealing with technologies and robots, sometimes we forget the people. And I'm telling you to train the people. For example, if we speak about power centers, to train the people in any power center, just to be aware of suspicious signs. And if they see and identify suspicious signs, just stop the turbine. It's a small damage, but then you bring the experts to deal with the specific signs and to see what's really going on. I call it the double S and the double F. You know, there's no smoke without fire. So the double S is smell the smoke, and the double F, bring the experts to fight the fire. And we all know that in water, when you allow the water to stream in one way, you can block it from return. In data, it doesn't work, because the door out creates a door in. So, for example, we've just opened a training center in Israel for people who are working in such control centers, to train them how to define suspicious signs, although you can get it automatically. But we all remember that at the end of the day, people are solving problems of technology. Technology don't solve problems of people. In Israel, we are blessed by the fact that at the age of 18, young people are joining the military and are joining veteran teams who has very, very severe responsibility in terms of cyber. They have pretty big budgets and very sophisticated tools. And they are confronting cyber threats while at the same time trying to see where are the opportunities of cyber issues. The very famous man of strategy, Sun Tzu, said once that if you win 100 battles, it doesn't reach the top of the performance. But if you force your enemy to surrender with no combat, that's the top. So with cyber, when we are trying to get those young people to get the insights of offensive and defensive, when they finish their military service, so they are in thousands going to the civilian affairs. And once they are in the civilian affairs, they bring the insights they've got in the time of the military, putting them together with the civilian opportunities in Israel and worldwide, and that's the best way to get a very sophisticated modus operandi, how to fight cyber threats. We all know that the country is trying to get what we call databases, vast databases, in order to have, for example, fingerprints, face recognition, and computing and digitizing systems that we have today enables you really to build dramatic infrastructures. But at the same time, it creates kind of a threat. Because if a hacker succeeds to penetrate the country's database, that's a disaster. But it's needed because sometimes in a very, very emergency situation, you need a huge bad database. For example, 9/11, the most horrible terror attack in the history of terror, in 9/11 there were close to 3,000 victims. Till today, there are more than 1,000 victims that were not identified. Try to imagine that you have a database of fingerprint or DNA of all people, and you compare it with them, there's no 1,000 people missing with no identified of their bodies or remains of the body. We just had 6 months ago a crash of an Ethiopian airline jet with 157 people, amongst them 2 Israelis. One of them was just identified a month ago because we could compare his DNA to a kind of a database of DNAs that we had in Israel. But many of the others, including one Israeli, are not recognized yet. We all understand that it's needed for every country, whether it's China, Israel, or any other country. But at the same time, we do understand it's very risky to put it if we don't have the guarantee to make sure, each one of us, that if I give my fingerprints and if I give my face recognition, it's not going to be used for bad targets. In criminal aspects, we do understand that police is allowed, in Israel, I believe it in many other countries, including here, to take your fingerprints and DNA if you just got arrested. And if you got arrested and your DNA and fingerprints is in the bank, the database of the police, and once they have an opportunity to check it, compare to this bank, very important crimes were solved just by that. Robberies, homicides, rapes, and many others. Of course, over the years, you get better technology, better tools that enable you to go back and to check crimes that were committed years ago that the technology 5, 10, 15, or 20 years ago couldn't solve such a crime. We always say high walls creates good neighborly. But when it comes to cyber issues, I recommend us to say effective walls create real trust from the people into the country database using. So think about it on the way that you're going back home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Avi Ditcher, for your wonderful speech. 感谢埃维迪希特先生的精彩演讲。我们知道，网络安全和密码是密不可分的。下面让我们有请2015年图灵奖得主惠特菲尔德·迪菲先生发表主旨演讲。他的演讲题目是“严峻挑战下网络安全技术的应用和发展”。让我们掌声有请。Now please welcome the winner of the 2015 Turing Prize, Mr. Wilfred Diffie, to a stage for a speech on topic of application and the development of cybersecurity technology in a challenge contest. Now please welcome.
Good morning. I thank you all for inviting me here. Yeah. So I'm very grateful to my hosts for the title. I delayed too long sending them a title. They made one up. I like that. It gives me a chance to respond. And so what follows is my response to the wonderful title that I have been given in preparation for this meeting. Avi Dikta asked an interesting question. He said, who is interested in cybersecurity? And I found somebody who is, President Xi Jinping. He said a little while ago, without cybersecurity, there is no national security. Without informationization, there will be no modernization. And I think that expresses very, very well something that Avi Dikta also said, that basically the route to smooth operation of our economies, the route to progress is increasing interchange and information, and what is required in order to be able to make good use of that is trust that we can make use of our information in our interests better than our opponents can make use of our information in their interests. Now, That's probably I pushed the small button. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to go through things as I usually do with a good deal of history and sort of fundamentals. What is cybersecurity? It's protecting our systems. But it's a very broad term. Just as national security may often mean that you fight a foreign war because it is in your national interest. I'm afraid my country is perhaps over-enthusiastic about that. Cybersecurity is a very broad term, and it includes offensive and deterrent activities as well as directly defensive activities. Now, it has many origins, and I'll explain in a moment why that is. But the most visible origin is communication security, what you do to protect radio transmissions from exploitation by your opponents. It also arises from an era that is not, I think, remembered by people much younger than I am, of what was called time sharing and the shared use of computers, which was transformed by information technology and reemerged as cloud computing, in which you aren't even aware of what computers you're sharing. Ancestor is signals intelligence. That's the most close ancestor, and the organizations that practice cyber warfare are largely the organizations that previously exclusively practiced signals intelligence, the exploitation of other people's communications. But it's much broader than that. And a whole lot of elements of classic espionage, human intelligence, and covert action, sending in agents who do something more than acquire information, goes into cybersecurity. Another interesting direct ancestor is electronic warfare, largely about radars and acquiring information through radars or deceiving radars. That is the source of much of the technical spirit that goes into cyber warfare. And finally, an associated area called electronic warfare, in which in many ways you attempt to deceive and disable your opponent's use of electronics to acquire information. Collectively, cybersecurity and its broad associate cyber warfare unify most of the hostile interstate actions that go on in, quote, peacetime. So just briefly to cover some of those pieces. Signals intelligence is and that's from an old U.S. Army manual, all the intelligence that you can get from the study of radio transmissions, mostly your opponent's radio transmissions. It all came in 4 years out of World War I. World War I is the first war fought in the era of radio. And radio was just magic, the way the internet is magic today. If you didn't make use of radio, you weren't going to win wars. And so all of the elements of radio interception, radio exploitation that are now known as signals intelligence came out of World War I, and that made the military take intelligence seriously. David Kahn, historian of cryptography, has said the rise of intelligence is the rise of SIGINT. Well, that started a tradition that lasted 70 years. For 70 years, signals intelligence sat and listened to its radios and analyzed what it received and recorded what it received and organized what it received, and it kept its head down. It didn't quite never transmit, but it more often got into trouble for running intercept platforms too far forward. Even though submarines like to play bumper cars in the Sea of Okhotsk and things like that, Vladivostok Harbor. And planes occasionally get caught the way one of ours did near Hainan Island a few years ago. But mostly that was a very safe technique. But there's a problem with it, which is you could sit and listen until you get gray and not learn what you wanted to know. And it's bothering you because you know there's a database out there and it has exactly what you want to know, and it's not very well protected, and at the risk, large or small, but becoming small, has become by 1990 rather small, you could reach out and reach into the database and get what you wanted to know. So you go from a purely passive form of intelligence to an active form of intelligence. And that is why cyber warfare involves a lot of spying. But once you've moved to active, then the boundary line between intelligence and covert operations declines. And so approximately 1990, several things came together. One is a big shift in the telecommunication systems. For a long time, they involved a lot of radios, microwave, satellites at the center, and they were all wireline at the edge. And then suddenly it flipped, and everybody went to carrying cell phones, and it was radio at the edge, and the center went largely to using optical fiber, which incidentally is the biggest impact on signals intelligence of any technology, dwarfs that of cryptography. That may not always be true, but in the 20th century, that was the great event. And as we began to make more and more use of databases and connect them to the rapidly growing internet, we got the environment in which cyber warfare could be practiced. Now, I can't help repeating every now and then the essence of security is about four things. First place, you need to recognize the people you know, particularly the people you trust. Almost all the sort of problems that were being discussed with power generation is because something is willing to accept a signal from somebody it shouldn't be trusting because it can't recognize whom it trusts. There has to be a mechanism of introduction. You have to come to know people by being introduced to them. You need a provable way of giving evidence that can be transferred to another person just the way it is with a seal or a written signature. And finally, and it's the least important, though still very important, you need to be able to have private communications, communications that are only understood by the people you want to have understand them. And when you have these characteristics, then you can protect the control of your systems. Now, cybersecurity is engineering, and all its components are engineering, and they are driven by a combination of the requirements, the available technology, and the imagination of the practitioners. Maybe that's a little limited. We also get a certain amount of politics and economics weighing on the practitioners. Now, what has happened in approximately the last 20 years is several influences moved us to what I call the fighting model. Maybe you can find a better term of cybersecurity. Now, it's partly because I and my colleagues who worked exclusively on defensive measures, cryptography and what was called computer security, had not succeeded. Since then, it seemed fairly obvious, well, maybe we can do better with a more dynamic security model. Rather than thinking we can build a tall enough wall, we'll build a wall with, cameras, detectors, whatever, and when somebody comes at the wall or breaches the wall or goes over the wall, we will respond in one domain or another, which might within a society be by calling the police, or might be between nations, might involve some sort of retaliation. But the result was deterrence. And I think not incidentally, a lot of the people who were senior people in policy at that era had grown up in the nuclear deterrence Cold War environment. And so they saw deterrence as a viable tool and may have applied it, I believe, beyond where it was appropriate, because nobody has any idea how to protect a country the size of Russia or China or the United States from nuclear attack, from the effects of nuclear weapons. The only thing we knew how to do was deter. I frankly think we can do better in the realm of cybersecurity. Yeah. So what is needed that isn't being done? And I think there are sort of three directions. The first one vastly transcends cybersecurity. I think it would not be an exaggeration to say that we don't know how to program. Programming is about as old as I am, so, it's in its 70s. And the fact that we tolerate programs with myriad bugs is evidence that we need to know how to do it not a little better, but vastly better. And that's a major project. It not only involves a great deal of research, it involves a great deal of training and practice and codification. Second, through the course of my lifetime, the cost of computer hardware has come down by a factor of 1 million. That means we could afford to devote hardware to security to a degree that we don't. We could afford to have more hardware, have specialized hardware, make use of the fact that if something is running on a separate piece of hardware, then there is a limitation through the interface to what something can do to it. And finally, I think we need a change in the concepts of liability. This is a slightly US-centric point, but in the US, the computer industry is still making people believe that it is a young industry and that if you don't give it special privileges, it might wither and die. This, of course, is good for washing a pig. And I believe we should undertake a program, probably a 10-year program, but I suggested it more than 10 years ago and it hasn't happened yet, of moving toward strict liability for cybersecurity failures. Well, why don't we do all those things? And that brings us back to the challenging environment that was in the title. And roughly speaking, I think the answer is that although everybody speaks in favor of cybersecurity, there are a lot of people who don't really want it. Or they don't want it in the most obvious form, which is to say everybody is secure. So Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they don't want their users to be secure against them. And governments don't want their citizens to be secure against them. They want them to be vulnerable in the same way that they are to the military and police. And yet that has hampered the simplest way we might have achieved purely defensive cybersecurity. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing responses to what I have said.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Wildfield. Thank you for your wonderful speech. 感谢惠特菲尔德·迪菲先生的精彩演讲。下面让我们分享的嘉宾是新加坡网络安全专员、新加坡网络安全局首席执行官大卫瞿先生。他要和我们分享的是团结协作，建立安全可靠的网络空间。让我们掌声有请。Now please welcome Commissioner of Cybersecurity, Chief Executive of Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, Ms. David Koh, to the stage for a speech on topic of collaboration and cooperation toward a safe and secure cyberspace. Now please welcome.
Dear leaders, distinguished guests, friends, a very good morning to all of you, and I bring warm welcome, greetings from Singapore. I would like to thank Jihu 360 for inviting me to speak at the 7th Internet Security Conference here in Beijing. It is a great honor for someone from a small country like Singapore. The organizers told me that there are about 6,000 delegates here today. This goes to show the importance that all of you place on cybersecurity and the vibrancy of the Chinese cybersecurity ecosystem. Cybersecurity continues to be a key focus area globally, given that it is a critical enabler of our future digital economies and smart cities. It therefore undergirds our economic progress and the betterment of our collective living standards. To achieve this ideal, creating cyber partnerships will be essential. Indeed, collaboration and cooperation is an important theme for this year's ISC, which is about fighting the online battle, working together to build a vibrant ecosystem, and strengthening our collective cybersecurity. Cyber threats are transnational. Attacks can come from anywhere in the world. Cyber threats are also asymmetric. The defenders are constantly competing against the best hackers. The defenders need to get it right all the time, while the adversaries only need to get it right one time and get past our defenses to gain a foothold in our systems. We must acknowledge that governments cannot secure our national cyber defenses alone. In Singapore, we saw a 16% increase in cybercrime cases between 2017 and 2018. Cybercrime now accounts for about 20% of overall crime, and this percentage continues to increase year on year. These trends speak to the necessity for governments to work together with our stakeholders to create a robust and networked defense against cyber adversaries. At the same time, cybersecurity is not only about threat mitigation. As some have said, it is not just about building higher and higher walls. With threats also come opportunities. We should also see collaboration in cybersecurity from the lens of the vast economic opportunities that it offers. Governments and industries can work together to grasp the economic opportunities in cybersecurity and together create good jobs and economic growth for our people. I lead the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. This is the government agency in Singapore with the mandate to develop national cybersecurity policies, both to defend our networks and systems from cyber threats, but also to maximize the economic and job opportunities available in the cybersecurity industry and ecosystem. To do this, we have developed and implemented the Singapore Cybersecurity Strategy. This was first launched in 2016 by our Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong. Within our strategy are 4 pillars that explain how Singapore government partners with our stakeholders to mitigate cyber threats and leverage opportunities in cybersecurity. Let me briefly take you through some of the key ideas. The first pillar of our strategy is to build a resilient infrastructure. This involves protecting and securing our critical information infrastructure. These are the crown jewels responsible for the provision of essential services. We are committed that these essential services, such as energy, water, infocoms, banking, and finance, continue their operations even in the event of a cyber attack. We do this in close cooperation with our sector leads, which are government agencies that are the natural regulators of their respective sectors. They in turn work with the owners and operators of the CIIs, which are typically private sector entities that own or operate the critical systems responsible for these essential services. In Singapore's case, many of these private companies are foreign companies. In this way, the Cybersecurity Agency plays the role of both regulator and partner to ensure that our sectors have the capabilities and measures in place to protect against, detect, respond, and recover from cyber threats in a prompt and expedient manner. Last year, we also passed and implemented the Cybersecurity Act. This act provides a legal framework for the oversight and maintenance of our national cybersecurity in Singapore, with an emphasis on proactive protection of critical infrastructure against cyber attacks. This law places legal obligations on the owners of the infrastructure to put in place mandatory cybersecurity measures in their systems, as well as to conduct risk assessments and audits on their infrastructure and report cyber incidents to the Cybersecurity Agency within a specified time period. The law also authorizes the Cybersecurity Agency to respond to and investigate such cybersecurity incidents. Beyond legislative levers, equally important is the need to exercise our sectors and ensure that they are ready and resilient in the event of a cyber crisis. For instance, we conduct what we call Exercise Cyber Star, a whole of government, or indeed a whole of nation cyber exercise that puts Singapore's collective cyber incident management and emergency response plans to the test. We will be conducting the third exercise later this year. The second pillar is to create a safer cyberspace. The government recognizes that beyond safeguarding our CIIs, we need to raise the cybersecurity posture of our companies and our citizens. We want our enterprises and citizens to be cyber aware and cyber secure through the adoption of good cybersecurity practices. We cannot have a strong digital economy if our systems, networks and devices that our enterprises and citizens use are exposed and vulnerable. To do so, we conduct outreach campaigns to spread awareness of good cyber hygiene practices to stay safe and secure in cyberspace. For example, just to name a few, using a strong password, two-factor authentication, antivirus software, as well as updating our software. We also work with schools and trade associations to incorporate elements of cybersecurity and cyber wellness into resources for our youth and small businesses. Through these initiatives, the government partners with our citizens and enterprises to enhance the national cybersecurity posture. This must be the collective responsibility of the government, the community, individuals, and enterprises. The third pillar of our strategy is the development of a vibrant cybersecurity ecosystem. We want to build up our cybersecurity industry as a growth sector for Singapore, which opens up high-value jobs and opportunities for our people. To this end, we have attracted a critical mass of the world's top cybersecurity companies to establish a presence in Singapore. We would most welcome cybersecurity companies like yourselves in China to join our ecosystem in Singapore. We also actively help to grow local companies and expertise in the cybersecurity domain. Last year, we set up in Singapore our first cybersecurity startup hub to help promising startups develop their business ideas, scale, and to go international. We also recognize that manpower is our best resource. We have been actively implementing initiatives to deepen our cybersecurity capabilities and to promote growth and career development in our cyber professionals. As you may know, Singapore, like Israel, has a conscript army. We have 2 years of compulsory national service. Last year, the Ministry of Defense implemented a dedicated vocation for cybersecurity, where selected conscripts are trained in cybersecurity to secure and protect military systems and networks. This will give them a head start in cyber skills and experience and will help them in their future cybersecurity careers should they choose to join the wider industry. Through these programs, the government collaborates with the industry to build up cybersecurity ecosystem and co-develop a strong talent pool of cyber professionals. These efforts create the optimal conditions for the industry to succeed. Lastly, the fourth pillar involves strengthening international partnerships. To tackle the transboundary cyber threats, countries need to work with one another. We must endeavor to create and maintain a rules-based international multilateral order in cyberspace, based on applicable international law and the adoption of voluntary cyber norms and rules. Cyberspace is not that different from traditional domains like the air, land, or sea. For example, we abide by trade rules set out by the World Trade Organization or aviation regulations promulgated by the International Civil Aviation Organization. Such rules are essential to ensure that there is mutual understanding among countries on how activities in the global commons should or should not be, so as to safeguard our collective safety and security. In turn, these rules support stability in the global commons and allow us to leverage these global commons for our economic growth and to achieve a higher standard of living for our people. We have everything to lose and nothing to gain if we fail to develop and abide by common agreed upon rules in cyberspace. We are at the cusp of a global Industry 4.0, We should be wholly online, led by intelligent smart systems, reliant on AI, machine learning, and data analytics. Many of the companies and enterprises here today are flag bearers of such technology. If we accept that our future way of life depends on the digital space, then it must also be clear that we urgently need to build and implement the rules and norms of cyberspace to allow us to live, work, and to transact safely and securely in this domain. The question is how we can get there. The United Nations has convened both a United Nations group of governmental experts as well as an open-ended working group to discuss ICT security measures. The discussions will start later this year. Singapore looks forward to participating actively in both these committees and working with countries, including China, and other stakeholders to make progress as the United Nations. But that said, developing international rules in and of itself is not enough. Efforts to drive trust and cooperation in cyber should take place across multiple complementary fronts. To this end, Singapore leans forward through regional and international platforms to advance the important conversation on cyber norms. We do this in three ways. First, we promote dialogue to focus international attention on the international community on key cyber issues. Since 2016, Singapore has been holding our annual cybersecurity conference called the Singapore International Cyber Week. The SICW serves as a premier cyber forum in the Asia Pacific, bringing together key cybersecurity stakeholders to Singapore to forge partnerships and engage in dialogue on salient cybersecurity issues. Last year, more than 8,000 delegates from more than 50 countries attended our Cyber Week. In particular, we bring together cybersecurity and ICT ministers, top officials and industry leaders from all over the world, including from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. We cordially invite participants from China, from the government and industry to attend SICW from the 1st to the 3rd of October this year to share your views and perspectives on cybersecurity. Second, we work closely with our neighbors in ASEAN to develop and implement regional cyber norms which are congruent with the norms developed at the United Nations Group of Government Experts in 2015. For example, we host an ASEAN Ministerial Conference on cybersecurity in conjunction with our Cyber Week. And last meeting in September 2018, the ASEAN ministers and senior officials agreed to subscribe in principle to all 11 recommended voluntary non-binding norms. This is a huge step forward for our region. Singapore will continue to work with ASEAN towards the adoption and implementation of these cyber norms. Lastly, we catalyze practical cooperation by facilitating regional capacity building of efforts and confidence building measures in cybersecurity. Singapore efforts on this front include cert-to-cert information sharing, memoranda of understanding, and various initiatives through our ASEAN Cyber Capacity Program. We seek to build technical, policy, and strategy building capabilities within our ASEAN member states. We are also committed to the launch of an ASEAN-Singapore Cybersecurity Center of Excellence in October. This Center of Excellence will provide cybersecurity capacity building in areas like strengthening states' research capabilities and strategy development, legislation and norms building, and incident response capabilities, as well as information sharing among CERTs. And lastly, providing practical experience through cyber range and exercises. In conclusion, the digital domain presents many exciting opportunities for our economies and to improve our standards of living. But with opportunities comes risks. We cannot leverage these opportunities if our systems do not have robust cybersecurity. It undergirds and enables our future digital economies and smart cities. To achieve this robust cybersecurity cooperation and partnership, these elements are key. This includes working with our owners of critical infrastructure, enterprises, cybersecurity industry, academia, as well as other countries. All of us must do our part to protect the global commons of cyberspace. Conferences like the ISC are useful for this, to create the partnerships and construct a network of trust and resilience. I understand there are close to 20 cybersecurity industry and technology panels at this year's ISC. It brings together experts to discuss all the pertinent dangers that we face. And I look forward to hearing your perspectives, and I wish you all a fruitful conference. Thank you.
好，感谢大卫许先生的精彩演讲。Thank you for your impressive speech. 下面让我们有请嘉宾来自以色列，让我们掌声欢迎前以色列国家信息安全局局长、前以色列国家网络安全委员会主任艾雷茨·克雷尔先生。他的演讲主题是以色列网络空间安全国防体系建设思路。Now please welcome former director, the National Information Security Agency of Israel, former director, the National Cybersecurity Authority of Israel, Mr. Aris Krainer, to the stage for a speech on topic of thoughts on the construction of Israel's national defensive system for cyberspace security. Now please welcome.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. And thank you for letting me be here. And I wish us all a very fruitful conference. I had the pleasure and the honor to lead the building of the Israeli defense capabilities, cyber capabilities. And I think it was one of the most challenging and interesting things I've been doing in my life. I'm sure that everybody here feel the same about cyber at all, and cybersecurity as part of it. And let me immediately dive into what was last week in DEF CON, which is the biggest hacker conference in the world. And everybody at that conference were thinking about hacking into computer systems on board airplanes. And that was because the crash of the Boeing 737 a couple of months ago happened to be because of kind of a software, something that happened inside there. But when something happened which is related to a software problem, then everybody everybody with a hacker state of mind think to himself, can I replay it? If there was an accident, can I make it by means? Not just occasionally, but can I control that kind of things? And they were discussing Dreamliners, they were discussing F-15, they were discussing a lot of vulnerabilities that may be found in computer system or in networks on board airplanes. And that brings to a huge area in cybersecurity, which is the area of transportation, whole transportation. Because when we think about transportation, when we think about safety, we actually think about security. Doesn't matter if we are talking about cars, cargo vessels, cruise lines, airplanes, whatever transportation is part of its mission, then cyber is a critical and crucial part of the ability to make it run. And if there will be no cyber or a good cyber solution for those moving elements, then those moving elements will not have a future. Actually, when you think about it, the feeling of sitting in a car and suddenly you will hear a voice coming from the media system. Hi, this is Jack the Ripper. I just hijacked your car, and if you don't send me 4 bitcoins, then your family and yourself will not have the ability to brake the car, to push the brakes. Probably nobody will want to find himself in a situation like that. And for that, a lot of creativity should be planned into the security of all those mobile things. As mentioned before, we are living in Israel, we're living in a very hard or a tough neighborhood. And we had to survive and we had to fight for our way. So we had the chance, the opportunity, the luck, you might say, to fight with any new threat that there is in the cyber arena. Whenever there is a new malicious code, whenever there is a new system that found to be vulnerable and somebody is trying to exploit it, in Israel we needed to fight against it because, as you've seen, our enemies are all around, and any one of these systems that we see here, doesn't matter if this is a satellite, a J-23, or a bank in the United States, is vulnerable to cyber attack. The infrastructures, the critical infrastructure that we have in every country becomes a tougher and tougher challenge. And this is why, or part of it is because there are a lot of legacy systems in these places, in these infrastructures. And when you have legacy systems, and when you have IT systems that are connected to those legacy systems, then a lot of vulnerabilities are being created. We took a very ancient way of thinking and we put it together with very sophisticated IT systems, and the combination between those two created so many vulnerabilities that the SCADA security and the OT, the operation technology security, became a real heavy part in any country that want to protect its way of life. It was mentioned here, the water, the sewage, the electricity, communication, finance. In each of them, you actually can crash a country, can make it down on her knees without even shooting one bullet. You know, cybersecurity it cannot be, or cyber at all, cannot be understandable by our senses. We cannot measure the effect of cyber weapons with any measurements that we have in the physical world. A virus does not have a height, does not have a width, does not have a weight, but still it can destroy this and can make the same effect just as a commando unit or a plane or a missile. And it comes with the speed of light, and it comes with a lot of splits. To send 1,000 missiles, it's a pretty hard challenge. To send 1,000 malicious virus, this is something that hackers are doing as their day-to-day job. In Israel, there are in any moment about 500 cyber startups. 500 cyber startups means that Israel is almost a superpower in cyber security. And I'm not trying to be not modest, but the way that the people in Israel act, the way that Israeli companies find their living, the way that they have their culture brings that situation, brings that nice and very wide innovation way of thinking to almost all these companies. I've been visiting dozens of startup companies in the last 5 years, and I can tell you that even though that I met the most innovative companies and the most innovative ideas in the cyber arena, I still find myself surprised anytime that I see what those guys are doing. You know, Israel is a very small country, and compared to China, it's like comparing a speedboat to a naval carrier. We cannot do what China can do, but we can maneuver very quickly. in a way that big countries and sometimes big companies find difficult to move in that way. So there is a lot of innovative about automatization, because we don't have so much manpower, so we need to do a lot of things very automatically in a very rapid way. So that is how you can, when you think of it, how you can find the Israeli technology in places like the experiment that was just a few weeks ago, when a missile hit another missile, the Iron Dome, which protects the Israeli borders or the settlements near the borders. And this kind of innovative way of thinking can only come where you have a state of mind as the people in the state of Israel have. The legacy systems we created, I know at least 10 Israeli companies that have created a very innovative solution in a way in much bigger countries and much bigger enterprise never thought of that. Also, because we have that problem, we are not big, and our electricity grid is pretty small, so every hit on that could have major effect on the life in Israel. So the solution that were developed for that were innovative in the same relatively way. We knew how to act, or we understood that we need to act in this arena 20 years ago. That was pretty early. Not so many countries are in this area for 20 years, and this is part of the answer why is it so developed in the state of Israel. You know, when we think about medicine and cyber, we probably think about medical files, we think about remote surgeons and remote medical systems. But let me give you another perspective about cyber and medicine. Cyber to computer systems is just like medicine to mankind. Remember that. Cyber to information systems and to computer systems is exactly like medicine to mankind. Because if we suffer from viruses, we need to cure them. And our best way to cure the disease is to prepare for that and to be healthy from the beginning. We need the same state of mind, the same idea, put that in cyber systems. And when you think, if you think to yourself that mankind will not need medicine in the next 100 years, then you might say to yourself, okay, I don't want to care about cyber. But if you think that people will still need medicine in the next decades and millenniums, then cyber will be part of any system, of any place where there is a computer, or actually where there is electricity current running. Because cyberspace is where there is electricity. It doesn't matter if it is not controlled by computers right now. But in a couple of years, every place that we have electricity current will be controlled by some kind of computer, whether it will be embedded or other kind of software. And we have artificial intelligence, and I'm not talking about what good it will bring to the humanity, but think of malicious software with AI capabilities. We can actually think of an immortality virus that goes all around and now defense can get him because he has its own machine learning capabilities, and he learns how to defeat all the defense systems that he meets. That will be part of our challenge. Last sentence, before I finish my presentation, I had the opportunities to brief a lot of politicians, a lot of high-ranking officials all over the world. And I was asked, tell me, if this all kind of catastrophic can happen, why it didn't happen until now? Well, I told them, I don't really have a good answer for that. But I also do not have a good answer why it took 50 years until somebody took a knife, cut the throat of 2 pilots, and crashed the Twin Tower buildings. That could be done 50 years ago in many high buildings all over the world. So, for my last sentence, there are a lot that can be done. States and companies should prepare themselves. This is the best way how to deal with the cyber challenges that we are facing, with a lot of levels, with a lot of wisdom, and with a lot of smartness. Thank you all, and let us have a good conference.
Thank you. Thank you for your impressive and profound speech, Mr. Eric Skriner. 感谢艾雷茨·克雷尔先生的精彩演讲。下面让我们掌声有请2011年诺贝尔经济学奖得主托马斯·萨辛特先生发表关于网络安全经济、成本和国际方面的主旨演讲。让我们掌声有请。Now please welcome the winner of the 2011 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, Ms. Thomas J. Sargent, to the stage for a speech on topic of cyberspace, economics, cost and international aspects. Now please welcome.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here and to listen to the preceding talks. So, I'm an economist, and there's actually been a lot of economics in the previous talks. So this is going to be basically organized common sense. So here's the big picture. About economics. The way economics works, it gathers insights by giving the same name to a bunch of different things. And what this does is it helps identify common underlying forces, causes, and cures. So cybersecurity, that's just one thing that's going to have the same name. Okay, so what this is going to be, my few minutes is some remarks about crime and punishment, and this is the 21st century version of it. So what there is, and we've already heard this, there's a race going on, and the race is between the offense, and these are criminal technologies and criminal enterprises. And there's the defense, there's security software and protocols produced by service providers and deployed by customers. Customers like myself have a big role in this. Okay, so key thing is Whitfield's last slide. A good question economists or social scientists ask is, you see some outcome and you ask who wants it and who wants to change it. Come back to that. So there's incentives. So key thing is there's a balance of incentives. There's positive financial rewards from criminal activity. There's substantial ones. And the downside for a criminal is there's dangers from detection and punishment. And ultimately, cybersecurity is going to be the result of the balancing of those forces, just like other crimes. So what are the incentives? So as the value of online activities grows, the payoffs from crimes grow. That's economics 1. So, on the other hand, as detection and conviction probabilities and punishment probabilities are important, they grow. As punishments grow in severity, the expected payoffs from internet crime decline. So how are we going to balance these? So, technologies. So, many of the technologies that citizens and researchers like myself benefit from, they're also being put to evil use by malevolent actors. So there's Tor, it's and other dark criminal web services. There's Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which is originally something which is not criminal, but it provides a way for illegitimate actors to transfer money undetected by government authorities. That's why central banks like the People's Bank of China and the Federal Reserve are very concerned about cryptocurrencies, and they should be. There's also, this is the way economics is, there's black markets. There's been black markets ever since there's been government regulation. So there's now the development of sophisticated black markets for trading stolen data and malevolent software. There's hierarchies in a whole industrial organization in criminals that's developed, a whole ecology. There's the development of intermediaries that supply malevolent software and hardware. All that's been mushrooming. Okay, so, and finally you can ask, what are the sources? Where do you get the criminals? Because the criminals are highly trained. So what are the sources? Well, unfortunately, in the United States, some of the criminals are current and former employees of national intelligence services and internet companies. So the recent hacking that was done of a big U.S. bank was done by someone who had just left Amazon. And she got trained at Amazon to do her things. There's there's WikiLeaks and other U.S. breaches. And finally, there's state-trained and paid hackers. So finally, one of the organizers asked me to figure out some estimates of how much does internet crime cost? And an answer to this question would be an input to a follow-up slide for Whitfield. His question was, who wants to stop internet? Who wants to stop hacking? Who wants to make things more secure? Well, so how much does it cost? So there's tremendous measurement problems in figuring out exactly what the costs of internet crime are, because there's detrimental incentives. There's incentives not to report that you've been compromised, and these incentives have already been mentioned. There's adverse legal and reputational consequences. You mentioned the bank, of revealing that data and services have been stolen or compromised. So our measurements of underreporting are a problem. So what are the components of costs of crime? Just go through it. Well, there's expenses to develop and deploy deterrence strategies. It costs a lot of person power and money to figure out technologies to deter. There's something else going on. There's and this is hard to measure. There's people who don't trust the internet enough to do business on the internet, so they use paper and pencil. They use an old-fashioned technology. They'll hold a meeting in person instead of instead of online, and so on. There's financial losses from being successfully attacked. There's reputational costs from being successfully attacked. Those are all hard to measure. But there's global estimates that have been done by people who've tried to wrestle with this. So one estimate I've seen is that the internet economy is, in 2016, it's even bigger today, is 4.2 trillion. That's the size of a very big economy. The estimate of internet crime that year was approximately 600 billion. Economists like to talk about tax rates. So if you take a ratio, that means there's an implicit tax rate of about 15% that comes from internet crime. If you could lower that, or somebody, a legitimate authority could collect that tax rate, that's a fairly high tax rate, and it might be higher. So in the United States, I'll kind of close in an optimistic thing. The total costs, people say, are 100 billion or 150 billion a year. It's a big number. Intellectual property theft is about 20% of that, 20 billion a year. Hackers coming in and stealing company secrets. Okay, so here I'll close on an optimistic note, kind of a theme of the conference. There's substantial room for international cooperation. And there's precedent for this. There's a success story. Presidents Xi and Obama in 2015, they made an agreement. It's a very sophisticated agreement. They took steps to prohibit industrial espionage, commercial espionage. And what they did simultaneously, they acknowledged or allowed military and diplomatic espionage. So they didn't try to stop all espionage. Intelligence gathering, they thought, was a stabilizing influence. Countries figure out what other countries are doing. So this was a sophisticated deal that U.S. intelligence services say seems to be working, according to reports. And the amount of industrial, quote-unquote, theft of international intellectual property, supposedly from China to the United States, has decreased substantially as a result of this agreement. So I think there's room for substantially more international cooperation, and there's an international trade in enforcement and expertise. Thanks. I'm looking forward to the future talks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas J. Sargent for your speech. 感谢托马斯·萨辛特先生的精彩演讲。下面嘉宾来自俄罗斯，让我们掌声欢迎俄罗斯联邦国际信息安全协会理事长阿纳托里·斯米尔诺夫先生。他带来的演讲主题是当前国际信息安全的紧迫问题——俄罗斯视角。Now please welcome General Director, National Association of International Information Security, Russia, Mr. Anatoly Smirnov, to stage for a speech on topic of actual problems of international information security, a view from Russia. Now please welcome.
Good morning, dear colleagues. Da Zahao, Baoциan Вабухайвей, Шоаханьей, Свои Вашуэй. Прежде всего, позвольте выразить искреннюю признательность организаторам форума за приглашение принять участие в столь важном мероприятии. Очень приятно выполнить поручение президента нашей ассоциации Владислава Шерстяка и передать дружеские пожелания в успешной работе форума, а также выразить его благодарность за радушие хозяев и плодотворность участия в форуме прошлого года. Весь мир охвачен беспрецедентной информационной революцией. Стремительно развивается глобальная информационная инфраструктура, и драйвером являются веб-технологии. И виртуальное пространство стало еще одним измерением реального пространства, таким же, как земная поверхность или воздух. Уже сегодня многие элементы критической инфраструктуры ведущих стран мира переведены на цифровые технологии. Однако в условиях торговых и технологических войн данный феномен, наряду с несомненным позитивом для социализации человечества, порождает все новые, все более коварные вызовы и угрозы для цивилизации. В этом контексте очень приятно, что Россия и Китай связывают по-настоящему дружеские, братские узы в деле обеспечения международной информационной безопасности. Заключенное в 2015 году межправительственное соглашение между нашими странами о сотрудничестве в области обеспечения международной информбезопасности как раз перевел эту работу на принципиально новый уровень. Искренне рад, что позиция наших стран по вопросам обеспечения международной информбезопасности практически совпадают, а российские и китайские делегации тесно координируют свою работу на международных площадках и форумах. И особый импульс данному сотрудничеству придают регулярные встречи лидеров наших стран Владимира Путина и Си Цзиньпина. Данный тезис нашел новое подтверждение, когда председатель КНР Си Цзиньпин по приглашению президента Путина в июне посетил Россию с государственным визитом и принял участие в 23-м Петербургском международном экономическом форуме. Владимир Путин и Си Цзиньпин подписали очень важные документы. Совместное заявление о развитии отношений, всеобъемлющего партнерства и стратегического взаимодействия в новую эпоху, а также совместное заявление об укреплении глобальной стратегической стабильности в современную эпоху. Впечатляет также то, что были подписаны еще 25 документов о сотрудничестве в различных сферах экономики, науки, образования и средств массовой информации. В совместном заявлении в развитии отношений особого внимания, учитывая тематику форума, заслуживает пункт 6, который описывает взаимодействие по теме международной информационной безопасности. Вы видите на слайде данный текст. Находясь на китайской земле, приятно сообщить, что изложенные подходы к проблеме международной информационной безопасности полностью совпадают с действующими документами в России. Это стратегия национальной безопасности, это доктрина информационной безопасности, это концепция внешней политики и ряд других документов, которые так или иначе отмечают важность нашей позиции и совпадающей с китайской по многим этим вопросам. Замечу, что когда мы говорим о информационной безопасности Россия подходит, как того требует международный стандарт и, соответственно, информационная безопасность включает и кибербезопасность. Вот это принципиальная, так сказать, позиция России, мы продолжаем ей придерживаться. Действуя по формуле «безопасность через развитие», Россия не на словах, а на деле принимает меры по обеспечению национальной безопасности в информационной сфере. Вот в июле в Кремле при президенте Путине подписаны целый ряд документов по высокотехнологическим проектам. Они направлены на технологический суверенитет и обеспечение национальной безопасности. Это искусственный интеллект, квантовые коммуникации, квантовые вычисления, технологии создания новых материалов и веществ, квантовые сенсоры, технологии распределенного реестра, блокчейн, новые поколения узкополосной беспроводной связи для интернета вещей, беспроводная связь нового поколения. И важным элементом этих технологий является сотрудничество с нашими коллегами из Китая, которые имеют общепризнанные успехи в их развитии. В то же время информационная среда является не только новым фактором устойчивого развития общества, но и фактором усиления опасности действий, связанных с реализацией преступных измерений и терроризмом, новым пространством международных споров и конфликтов. Политики и эксперты России едины во мнении, что обеспечение устойчивого функционирования этой среды возможно лишь на основе международного сотрудничества в области противодействия им и будущим угрозам. И главной площадкой такого сотрудничества должна быть Организация Объединенных Наций. И все большую роль в содействии этому процессу играют такие региональные объединения, как Шанхайская организация сотрудничества, БРИКС, ОДКБ и другие. На наш взгляд, это является единственным средством снизить тревожные тенденции, и к числу таких угроз, на наш взгляд, относится прежде всего стремительное превращение ИКТ-среды в пространство межгосударственного военно-политического противоборства, которое осуществляется, соответственно, с помощью средств ИКТ-технологии. И в этом плане уместно вспомнить китайского стратега и мыслителя Сун Цзы. Он сказал в своем знаменитом трактате «Искусство войны» главную идею китайской стратегии – воевать без оружия, побеждать без боя. Несмотря на прошедшие столетия, данная мудрость не утратила актуальности. Ведущие мировые державы стремятся вести борьбу с противником бескровными методами. И в доктринальных установках западных стран это оружие как компонента, вот в том числе гибридных и других войн. И мы видели, что в июне 2019 года газета «Нью-Йорк Таймс» со ссылкой на источники в правительстве опубликовала статью о том, что спецслужбы США активизировали попытки внедрения вредоносного программного обеспечения в энергосистемы России. Президент США Трамп назвал эту публикацию актом предательства. То есть не просто фейк-ньюс, а именно государственной изменой. Справедливо возникает вопрос, что это было, утечка секретной информации или пропагандистская акция устрашения? В этом контексте хотел бы сказать, что для придания легитимности надуманным обвинениям в проведении кибератак США продвигает новую концепцию «выяви и пристыди» «name and shame» it's so called. И настаивает, что группа стран в одностороннем порядке может выносить вердикт виновности в совершении кибератаки при таком подходе, как доказательные базы, то есть это коллективная атрибуция, абсолютно без фактов. И основным фактором будет, видимо, именно политический контекст, а аргументом так называемый тезис highly likely. По данным Национального координационного центра по компьютерным инцидентам России, в прошлом году было совершено более 4 миллиардов информационных атак. А общее количество этих атак за 6 лет выросло на 57%. И анализ показывает, что их пики, активность возрастала в ходе Олимпиады в Сочи, чемпионата мира по футболу прошлого года и выборы президента России. И согласно анализу зарубежных компаний, подчеркиваю, основным источником распространения таких атак являются интернет-ресурсы, расположенные на территории Соединенных Штатов Америки, до 87%. Думаю, что для Китая это очень важно, учитывая проведение через 3 года Олимпиады в Пекине. Думаю, что количество способов использования технологий такого для силового воздействия все больше и больше склоняется в сторону искусственного интеллекта. И по данным Организации по безопасности и сотрудничеству в Европе, свыше 50 государств мира активно реализуют программы создания боевых кибервирусов. В том числе и 10 государств, обладающих самыми внушительными военными бюджетами. И беспрецедентный рост военного бюджета США прошлого года 716 миллиардов долларов и еще больше планируемый на 2020 год 750 миллиардов тому подтверждение. При этом еще страны НАТО 100 миллиардов вносят свою лепту. Самоочевидно, что мы движемся в сторону, когда эти объемы вооружений так или иначе могут сработать на войну, кибервойну. И пример Соединенных Штатов. Давайте посмотрим, как силовое воздействие, соответственно, мы видим все те пункты, которые я выбрал из многих главные, показывают использование и как раз и информационно-коммуникационных технологий для силового сценария, соответственно, развития событий по отношению не только к России, но и к Китаю, и к Ирану, и к другим государствам. И особо хотел бы обратить внимание на то, что в январе Пентагон разработал стратегию «Троянский конь», и для того, чтобы инспирировать протесты пятой колонны. И это очень похоже, что сейчас происходит в Москве, и не только в Москве, но, например, и в Гонконге. И в этом контексте хотелось бы сказать, что это не только простые, могут быть атаки, типа DDoS-атаки, внедрение шпионских программ и так далее, но это еще и очень важное направление создания умных ботнетов, которые бы могли создать ситуацию так называемого кибербунта. И наш президент ассоциации Владислав Шерстюк сказал, если международное право не работает, тогда перестает работать и сила права, а начинает работать право силы. И, наконец, очень важный момент. Мы помним, что было в Югославии, что было в Ираке, что было в Ливии, что происходит сейчас в Сирии, в других странах мира, когда государство злоупотребляет как раз свободой массовой информации для пропаганды идеологического превосходства, особой исторической роли, в том числе используя технологию фейков, фейк-ньюс, которые мы уже называем фейк-чейн. Есть блокчейн, а есть фейк-чейн. И это используется для манипулирования не только международным общественным мнением, но и является инспирированием тех или иных событий в стране. И мы для усиления противодействия этим попыткам 1 мая приняли закон о функционировании интернета именно безопасного, устойчивого, в случае, если из-за рубежа попытаются на него воздействовать в этих целях. Хотел бы сказать, что мы так или иначе абсолютно следим за всеми процессами, подходом других государств и внесли свой вклад в резолюции ООН, которая была принята подавляющим большинством. И в этом плане мы выступаем за недопущение конфликтов, против, то есть его легализации, что пытаются сделать некоторые страны, в частности, Таллинский центр НАТО. И отсутствие механизмов определения атрибуций кибератаки, то есть кто стоит за кибератаки, требует определения принципов так называемой киберделимитации и кибердемаркации в цифровом пространстве. И отсутствие атрибуции кибератаки не позволяет применять международное право, что само по себе создает дополнительную угрозу сохранению стабильности. Наша ассоциация над этим активно работает, и у нас есть серьезные наработки. Мы готовы поделиться и сотрудничать с коллегами, кого это интересует. И поэтому Россия внесла на Генассамблее ООН новый проект, который поддержали 119 стран, из которых 32 стали ее соавторами. А кто выступил против? 46 государств, то есть в 3 раза меньше. 14 воздержалось. Именно те страны, которые обвиняют Россию в противоправном использовании технологий, выступили против принятия нашей резолюции. Замечу, что мы, конечно, повторяю, отслеживаем все те процессы, которые происходят в мире, и анализируем, и мы при этом готовы к открытому сотрудничеству, в том числе в рамках созданной этой рабочей группы открытого состава ООН, и в июне было первое ее заседание, где все государства могут участвовать, и это, в частности, получило название Кибергенеральная ассамблея. Еще одним путем решения проблем, связанных с использованием технологий, does Russia want war? Seeing is believing. В этом контексте мы, повторяю, максимально используем наши наработки и максимально стараемся проводить мероприятия. В частности, только что по оценкам нашего крупнейшего банка Сбербанк, ущерб мировой экономике от атак в этом году составит около 2,5 триллионов долларов, а уже через 3 года может достичь 10 триллионов. Абсолютно огромная цифра. И наши частные компании, например, Норильский никель, выдвинула хартию информационной безопасности, плюс Сбербанк провел огромную конференцию в прошлом году и в этом году. И эти идеи, эти инициативы синхронизируются с позицией государств в ООН, ибо одни и те же цели, то есть использование этих технологий в мирных целях, укрепление мер доверия, предоставление информации об уязвимости. В данном контексте важно, что и рабочая группа ООН, которая уже начала работать, планирует до конца года провести встречу с представителями глобального бизнеса. К сожалению, у нас нет международно-правовой базы, и надо ее создавать, в том числе единый. В этом плане мы надеемся на следующую сессию Генеральной Ассамблеи, где данная тема мы попросили включить. Это противодействие использования информационно-коммуникационных технологий в преступных целях. И, кстати, данная тема включена. Это как работает НАТО в части пропаганды, обвиняя Россию. На самом деле Вот так схема, центр передового опыта в Риге, и пропаганда, и экономические, и военные действия, все здесь прекрасно мы видим. И замечу, что вот данная тема будет буквально через уже скоро во Владивостоке на Восточном экономическом форуме, где участвовать будет президент Путин. Замечу, что я не отметил тему кибертерроризма, но американские эксперты нашли 8 способов использования интернета в целях террористической своей активности. И Россия поддерживает этот подход, делает не на словах, а на деле. И именно в этих целях была создана наша ассоциация, которая, за 1,5 года работы это не только огромное количество докладов, мероприятий, это сотни статей, монографий. И, наконец, хотелось бы особо сказать, что мы выпустили уникальную книгу. Это первая системная, первая книга по международной информационной безопасности в 3 томах. Она есть в электронной версии. Тот, кто будет интересоваться, мы можем об этом поговорить отдельно. И ассоциация готова к взаимодействию с любыми ассоциациями, организациями не только в Китае, но и в других государствах, именно в укреплении кибермира и кибербезопасности. Помните Паговурское движение против ядерной безопасности? Давайте сделаем кибербезопасность с нашей этой конференции, дать старт этому процессу. Спасибо. 谢谢。
好，谢谢阿纳托里斯米尔诺夫先生的精彩演讲。Well, thanks, Mr. Anatoly Smirnov, for your wonderful speech. 也感谢所有来自全球的各位顶级专家对于中国以及全球网络安全行业最新的观点分享。那现场朋友们，在此我们要隆重邀请出今天上午主论坛的一位重量级嘉宾，让我们掌声欢迎 IC 大会主席、360集团董事长兼 CEO 周鸿祎先生为我们带来关于网络战时代的挑战与应对的分享，让我们掌声有请。
他们又把我放到一个很窘迫的境界，大家肚子都饿了，能不能再坚持20分钟听我讲完？所以，我先表达3个感谢啊。这一次我们突发奇想，把 IC 搬到雁西湖畔，感谢北京市，感谢怀柔区给我们这个会的支持。这次路程比较遥远，特别感谢我们这么多的观众，这么多的嘉宾，从城里面开车过来，克服各种交通的不便，对吧？这个现场有大概4000名观众，很多人都是从很远的地方来，谢谢大家。最后还是要感谢一下我们的这次这么紧张，我们的员工，包括我们的礼仪小姐，都是我们的员工的志愿者。我们本着花小钱办大事，不花钱也办事的原则，当然我们还是花了好几千万来办这个会，也谢谢我们员工。那感谢前面的各位领导， 还有各种嘉宾、各种观点，都很精彩。但是时间有限，所以这时间已经拖长了。我就谈一个问题，就是围绕着网络战。网络战过去是个敏感词儿，对吧？刚才郭启全局长也说了，过去都不让提。我一说网络战，有人就说我是好战分子。但是从 WannaCry 开始流行的时候，在那个瞬间，我就认为 WannaCry 就是一次网络战的预演。我就觉得我们要正视网络战这个现实。所以最近网络战这个话题开始变得不那么敏感。人民日报、新华社、光明日报都发了多篇文章，在谈到某些国家对我们使用网络战。那我就举几个例子，大家可以看一看。顺道说，这是我原来的 PPT 跟我讲话都是文不对题，这次我认真的准备了一个30页的 PPT。这个 APT 34组织，它的网络武器里，其中有瞄准了中国的12个机构。19年之前，什么乌克兰电网攻击啊，什么伊朗阵网病毒，这些老生常谈，我们就不谈了。你就看，就在19年，关于停电这件事儿，就发生了多次。南美洲，对吧？包括刚才讲，《纽约时报》称俄罗斯电网被植入后门，伊朗号称要攻击这个美国纽约的电网。那么最近，美国跟伊朗互相打嘴炮。他们一个威胁要攻击导弹基地，一个威胁要攻击对方的电力，都是网络战的架势。最新的一个新闻，在2019 DEFCON 大赛里边，7名黑客两天内攻破了美国的主力战斗机 F-15的一个系统，这可能也是黑客历史上的一个巨大的突破。北约今年举办了最大的网络安全演习。索顿2019 ，25个国家，上千名专家，对吧？然后有4000个虚拟的军事系统，承受了2000多次攻击。所以这是我的第一个结论，就是网络战不是科幻小说里或者美国大片里的幻想的未来，网络战就发生在当下。其实网络战每天都在发生，只不过在过去的几十年里边，我们和平幸福生活过得太久了，我们觉得战争好像离我们很遥远。但是我觉得战争从来没有远离，我们必须要意识到网络战这种严峻的形势。如果我们像沙子里的鸵鸟一样，根本不承认网络战的存在，我们不能意识到网络战对我们今天的网络安全带来了什么样新的挑战，我们就根本谈不上去应对网络战。所以我强调一个观点，这时候必须用作战的视角来看待网络安全。所以网络战最大的一个特点和传统作战不一样，就是不宣而战。大家认真看 PPT 就行了，我每一页都写了一个金句，就绿色的字儿。传统作战分战时平时，对吧？就好像前面伊朗跟美国两个人咋咋呼呼说我要干这个我要干那个，这不是地道的网络战。网络作战最重要的是花相当长的时间通过攻击手段进行攻击，进行潜伏渗透到你的基础设施网络里，然后期望在关键的时候对你发起致命一击。所以潜伏渗透本身也是网络攻击的一部分，所以它谈不上平时战时。今天没有任何国家对我们宣战，但是已经有很多国家对我们国家的基础网络其实在不断的发起攻击。第二个，网络战的作战对象，网络战呢，让我们网络安全这些所有搞网络安全的人的应对的对手变了。过去我们应对的是什么？心怀不满的内部员工，或者一个窃取商业机密的友商，或者是小毛贼、网上一些小黑客的黑产力量。但今天网络战的对手全部是各个国家成立了网军。现在已经有100多个国家成立了大概超过200支网络战部队，都是军事级的技术，国与国的对抗，所以说是国家级的黑客力量，国家级的对手入场。我们国家有一个技术特别牛的很重要的一个企业，我就不说名字了，在6年前它的邮件系统就被 NSA 入侵， 这个也是被美国《纽约时报》揭露的。很多人就问我说，这么牛的一家企业怎么会被 NSA 入侵？道理很简单 ，NSA 是代表了全球可能美国最高水平的网军力量，用举国之力来入侵一个民间企业，有何做不到呢？那么物联网、工业互联网、车联网，包括现在谈的产业互联网，给我们带来一个巨大的机会的同时，实际上到了万物互联时代，虚拟空间和物理空间完美的衔接，过去所有在数字空间里的打击，都可以转成物理世界的伤害。所以今天为什么网络战突然成了香饽饽？因为大家发现关键基础设施会成为未来的战场。所有的网络战攻击，过去不仅仅是为了窃取情报，大家可以现在对交通、能源、金融这些基础设施发起攻击，可以获得比传统作战可能更好的破坏效果。那这个是老生常谈，但是我还要强调一下，刚才有位以色列专家，他有2页 PPT 跟我的 PPT 简直一模一样，其中一个他就说每一个系统都等于可能被攻击。那我们呢还是强调一个观点，这个观点我在 ICA 会上强调了好几年了，因为总有一些人像走江湖卖艺的一样，总是在兜售说买了什么技术，买了什么系统就可以保证网络高枕无忧。事实上这是一个谎言，因为今天所有的网络攻击之所以能够得手，都是利用了我们不知道的漏洞，利用了不知道的漏洞，可以非常看起来神奇的就控制你的电脑，控制你的主机，入侵你的网络。而漏洞怎么来的呢？有2个漏洞，一个是技术漏洞，因为所有的软件意念都是人做的，是人做的就会犯错误，每1000行代码就会有4到6个漏洞。所以想象一下，今天我们这么多的自动化的系统、云计算、大数据、物联网、人工智能，这里边该有多少行代码？这里边就隐藏了有多少个漏洞？这些漏洞无处不在，不可避免。还有一个很重要的就是人的漏洞，对吧？无论我们有多么严格的网络安全的规定，我们每个单位里总是有很多人会违反我们安全规定，会被人钓鱼，会被别人的社会工程学来进行攻击。所以因为有了漏洞，所以我们今天的系统一定会被网络攻击者，一定会被网络战部队攻进来。今天不存在攻不进来的系统，所以我们必须切换我们的假设，来重新思考我们的战法。刚才以色列那位专家画了4只猫，说谁是间谍，那个 PPT 比我这个做得好，我这就4个字儿。按照前面的假设，实际上我们提出一个更悲观的一个论点，就在我们很多网络里，在我们跟国防、重要基础设施、我们的科研很多重要网络里，是不是已经存在着敌已在我的这种情况？也就是说，敌人已经进来了，已经潜伏在你的基础设施网络里，只是你还不知道。那网络战还带来一个巨大的挑战，就是易攻难防。因为攻击者很简单，只需要2个小伙子知道有一台电脑，知道几个零对漏洞，就能够任意对一个国家的基础设施发起攻击。而防守方即使有成千上万的技术人员，面对着浩如烟海的网络设备，都不知道从何下手。那么即使你防守住了100次攻击，进攻者只要1次得手，他就成功了。你防住了100次攻击，但是你有一个地方疏漏了，被别人攻进来，你就失败了。所以这会导致严重的攻防不平衡。在这种攻防不平衡的情况下，我们今天来的我们都在考虑如何保护我们的网络基础设施，我们将何去何从？网络战我们还总结是一个整体战，我们不能不分军用民用。传统作战可能我们还分一个目标，说我只炸军用目标，对吧？所以我只用灵巧炸弹。但是大家知道，网络战即使它最后的目标是攻击一个国家基础设施，它也往往会从攻击一个个人开始作为跳板，经过一连串的攻击链，最后才能达到它的目标。在攻击个人的时候，可能还会攻击这个人经常上的网站、经常用的邮箱。所以在网络战里边，它不区分国家、企业、个人， 整个安全是一个整体。而且随着互联网的发展，我们越来越多的包括军事上的很多基础设施目标和国家重要的设施目标越来越难以隔离，他们会和互联网紧密的连在一起，所以就带来一个问题，就你即使把自己保护得很好，但是不怕神一样的对手，就怕猪一样的队友。你跟你联网的某一个供应商，或者跟你联网的某一个雇员，他的网络上有重要的这种安全缺陷被人攻陷了，可能就意味着你所有严防死守的网络也会被攻陷。我举个例子，我们跟美国同行交流的时候，我就问他们一个问题，我说美国人为什么这么傻呢？为什么五角大楼要连互联网呢？为什么不懂得隔离呀？他们说最早我们也是隔离的，但后来我们就连上波音了，连上洛克希德马丁了，后来波音就连上它的2级供应商了，连上它的合作伙伴了，连来连去最后都连到互联网上了。到今天美国五角大楼不仅要连到互联网，还要用亚马逊的 AWS 了。所以你就会发现在今天的互联网的环境下，联网的诱惑是非常大的，用我们整个的网络连成一个整体。所以我们做安全的时候必须要有整体的顶层设计，整体的考虑。如果我们各个单位都是各自为战，每个人好像只守住自己当前的一小块1亩3分地，他是守不住的，因为其他人的不安全可能会连累你。网络战同时又是超限战，这个超限战我想说的意思就是说，从我们现在观察到的攻击手法，各种手段无所不用其极，反正没有什么正的招数，都是歪招，而且各种手段会综合使用。我举一个例子，我们很多单位觉得我们的隔离网络很有效，我们通过光闸，通过刻光盘来传递数据。某国的网军就专门研究如何感染刻光盘的软件，在你刻的每一张光盘里放入一个病毒。我们觉得新买的设备总是没问题的，某国网军就在新出厂的硬盘里，在硬盘的固件里边植入病毒，反正总有一块硬盘会卖到你们家，对吧？我们觉得我们的某个核电站可能隔离得很好，其实对方网络攻击不会只用网络攻击的手段，他会用线下间谍的手段，他买通一个清洁工，或者他买通一个内贼，把一个像 U 盘一样的设备插到你内部电脑网络上，让你这个隔离就形同虚设。所以网络战今天的手段是多元，而且今天美军已经率先的把全域作战的概念提出来，就是陆海空天网，对吧？所有的各种在多种情况下的作战形式要综合使用。网络战还是秘密战？那我们前面讲过，网络战可以在瞬间制瘫基础设施，但这个前提它要通过长期的谋划、长期的渗透，它有一个我们叫 Q chain， 就一个攻击链。所以整个因为是国家级的团队，用的都是零对的漏洞，所以整个的网络战的攻击和传统攻击看起来它显得更为隐秘，来无影去无踪，很难溯源，很难取证。所以我们就得出一个更为黑暗的结论，在未来网络战将会成为国与国较力的战争手段的首选。为什么？成本低，效果好，烈度可控，把你打伤了，你还不知道是谁打的，连撒气连反击都不知道去找谁反击。所以你会发现，为什么美国跟伊朗，对吧？今年互相扬言攻击了那么多次，最后导弹都不舍得打一枚。实际上双方最后都选择在网络战上来进行角力。所以未来我觉得在19年之后，未来下一个5年，我们将会看到越来越多的跟网络战相关的这种安全威胁。所以我为什么今天要旗帜鲜明地把网络战这个敏感词再次讲出来？因为对我们每一个做网络安全的人来说，我觉得这是代表了完全全新的挑战，对手也变了，对吧？作战的目标也变了，战法也变了。原来很多成立的假设，比如说我们的网络固若金汤，我们的隔离异常有效，对吧？什么都变了，甚至我都强调敌已在我，可能在你的内部网络里已经有别人的潜伏。那么传统的这种通过不断的购买更多的安全软件硬件，传统的安全产品，对吧？然后构筑马奇诺防线的这种战法已经失效了。大家都知道马奇诺防线的故事，对吧？一战时很有效果，但是二战它对付不了轰炸机，对付不了装甲集群、闪电战。那在今天的网络战的情况下，我们传统的很多网络安全的战法 确实需要升级，否则我们面对网络战将无以应对。那360分享一个观点，网络战的最关键，新战法的关键，我们认为首先做到了是要能看见，因为我们分析了最近5年国内所有的网络安全事件，全世界发生了网络攻击，我们发现最可怕的一点是别人来了你不知道，别人走了你也不知道，干了什么你也不知道，留了什么你也不知道。所以如果我们不能解决看见网络攻击的问题，我们堆砌了再多的网络军火，我们堆砌了再多的网络产品，就像打仗你没有雷达，像一个睁眼瞎一样，你有再多的导弹高炮，你根本看不见别人的隐身飞机在哪里，你谈何终止，谈何阻断，谈何反制，谈何溯源。所以我们想看见别人的网络攻击，看见网络战的攻击是1，其余都是0。那么如何看见？那么我们讲3点如何看见。第一个，网络安全大数据是看见的基础。网络安全大数据能够记录下来，在整个网络空间里，所有正常的软件它的通信的行为，所有正常的软件的行为，当然也包括这些不正常的行为。那么只有企业的数据是不够的，因为一个网络攻击并不仅仅只是攻击企业，它会从攻击个人消费者开始入手，所以我们必须考虑要有全网的数据。那么我们只有最近几天的数据也是不够的，因为我刚才讲了，网络安全的攻击时效周期都很长，一般有的时间甚至规划谋划长达几年，甚至潜伏期也非常长。我们只有把全网所有发生的事情在各种维度上，在时间维度上放了长去看，我们可能才能真正的知道网络空间里发生了什么。而且我记得在前几届 ISC 会上我讲过一个观点，今天我们越来越多的网关上的流量我们看不见，为什么？因为都是加密 SSL、HTTPS 的流量。当然了，这个某国网军因为有对加密算法的这种强度攻击，使得他们可以比我们解开更多的这种流量。但是我们现在实际上从网关上我们看到的行为越来越少，但是终端上我们能采集到了很多程序的奇怪的行为，能够帮我们更好的反映这种攻击的本质。所以网络安全大数据是看见的基础。就像今天满大街你有很多摄像头，你记录下来每一个片段，当你把这些片段的碎片对到一起的时候，你才能还原出很多犯罪事件，很多攻击事件。那么有了网络安全大数据，有人就说了，那有了 AI 是不是就能够找到攻击了？这是不可能的。AI 的前提是你要先有知识库，所以威胁情报和知识库才是最重要的核心。它帮助我们能够在大数据中进行学习，去筛选出来那些可疑的因素。那什么是威胁情报和知识库？我举2个例子，一个最重要的就是漏洞，因为所有的攻击都要利用漏洞，所以你就可以理解为什么很多网络安全公司它根本不玩漏洞，它也不影响它卖产品。但是360过去几年里边已经发展成全世界挖掘漏洞最多的公司，因为每个漏洞都给我们提供了很多的知识，谁利用这个漏洞，如何利用这个漏洞，它实际上都代表了一种攻击的手法，包括 APT 的攻击行为。那么所有的这个在一个 APT 攻击，它的攻击在攻击链上可以把它的行为分成几十个阶段，这几十个阶段它什么样的行为是做什么，这里边的知识可以帮助我们发现更多的攻击，包括恶意样本和恶意网址的这种知识。因为恶意样本现在我们哪怕有上百亿，但是最后你会发现它的模式实际上是可以做一些分析。那么有了大数据，有了知识库，那最后靠什么呢？最后我认为网络战的本质最后是人和人的对抗，所以高级别攻防专家在最后的关头是起到决定的作用。尽管有很多人讲说这个今天有 AI 了，都可以无人化了，相信我，在网络战这个层面 AI 短期内还起不了决定作用，起决定作用的依然是双方高水平的这种网络攻防人员。当我们用大数据用知识库筛选出可疑的入侵的信号之后，我们这时候再妄想靠任何自动化的软件硬件去自动的发现去阻断是不可能的。我们这时候就需要上 高水平的安全专家，通过专家快速的响应，快速的在实战中的这种分析，从而能够发现和定位攻击，从而才能够做到对攻击进行阻断、进行溯源、进行止损。这是讲一点点广告。360的实践，在过去的10年里面，360在这3个方面做了比较多的工作，我就不一照念了。360今天是世界上拥有最大安全大数据的公司，大概有2个亿币，相当于多少部苍老师的电影我也算不来，大概好几亿部苍老师的电影。然后刚才讲了，360也拥有全球最大的威胁情报和知识库，特别是我们是全球挖漏洞最多的公司。这个还有呢，我们有几千名这种专业的安全专家，12个安全研究中心，17支攻防团队。最近国际上有一个黑客的排名一个大赛，360荣获了第1名和第2名。从这些，实际上360把这3个要素合在一起，构成了一个叫网络安全大脑，使得它能够真正的能够看见更多的国家级的网络攻击，实现防御的智能升级。在今天这个是5G 的时代，对吧？阿里都在做智慧城市大脑，对吧？谷歌也有谷歌大脑。那今天在网络战时代，我们要有跨时代的网络安全大脑，才能够帮助我们更好的解决看见的问题。那这个吹牛是没有用的，拿数字说话。360在过去的5年里边，我们率先独立发现针对中国的境外 APT 组织，一共发现了40个，涉及了上千个重要部门，包括能源、通信、金融、交通、制造、教育、医疗，很多关键的基础设施和政府部门、科研机构。我们发现了主流厂商的漏洞超过1500个，我们包括独立捕获了7次这种新的零对漏洞，对我国的这种攻击是国内唯一具备捕获在野零对漏洞的公司。在捕获 APT 攻击方面，我们在全球能排到前3名。这个就是360用我刚才讲的理念，使我们第一次真正做到了，我们看见了很多国与国的攻击，这些攻击背后都是其他国家的网军。所以360的竞争对手不是在座的同行，我们的竞争对手是其他国家的网络战部队。所以我也在这儿正好宣布一下，因为最近一直没机会给大家讲讲360重返企业安全，对吧？然后很多人对这事还不理解，有的人以为我们放弃企业安全了，不是的，我们重返企业安全。还有人以为我们重返企业安全就要跟所有的同行竞争，要成为行业公敌了，错了。360的定位很简单，我们进军企业安全就要干点非360莫属、舍我其谁的事儿，所以360就只干一件事儿，发挥我们独有的刚才的3大的核心优势，为党政军企提供安全的服务。什么安全服务呢？就是定位在国与国网络战下的，帮助大家基础设施，帮助企业国家能够看见攻击、阻断攻击和修复系统的能力，这就是360的使命和定位。那这点是不够的，因为光靠360我们解决不了整个网络战的问题，我们还要做3件事儿，是跟大家有关系的。第一个是共建，我们要共建一个分布式的安全大脑。我们有网络大数据，其实我们很多单位也有你们自己的大数据，我的大数据不可能给你，你的大数据也不可能给我，所以我们会输出分享我们网络安全大脑的大数据的这套分析技术，帮助很多政府部门、基础设施企业，也帮助生态伙伴打造你们自己的安全大脑，你们自己掌控自己的网络安全大数据，也具备很强的分析能力。我们今天讲大数据一句话，不求拥有和拷贝，但求互相能查询，对吧？我们能够互相通气，就像一个分布式的一个网络战雷达防御系统一样。我们每个人可能都能看到网络里发生了一些碎片的事件，但当我们把这些碎片拼起来的时候，我们就能够告诉国家又发生了什么样的网络战攻击。第二个是分享，我刚才讲了，360最重要的是由这些大数据产生的威胁情报和知识库，并不是说传统安全的产品就过时没有用了。传统安全的很多产品 IDS、IPS 防火墙、EDR 终端软件也需要升级，所以360会向友商 来分享威胁情报知识库，帮助传统的网络软硬件产品升级。当每一个网络安全产品在背后都有一个网络安全大脑，都能得到最新的网络威胁情报的时候，我们所有的老产品、新产品一块能联合起来，都能够去发现威胁、阻断威胁。第三个，我觉得最重要的是赋能客户，因为过去解决的是小安全问题，我们给客户琢磨着卖点东西，客户再弄几个网管，基本上就能解决安全问题。但今天到了网络战时代，客户面临的威胁是其他国家的网络战部队，是非常专业的军事力量。那么我们还是简单的期望给客户卖点东西就解决安全问题，这个无疑是我觉得是闭门造车。所以我们认为最重要的不是给客户卖东西，而是如何提升客户的应对网络战的能力。所以我们管它叫赋能。那这里边呢，我就不细讲了，因为已经没有时间了。那么如何帮助客户建立他的应急响应队伍？如何通过刚才郭启全局长讲到了实战攻防，那通过这种实战攻防，帮助我们的客户提升他的应对能力？如何帮助客户利用众包，把中国甚至全世界优秀的安全人员都发动起来，帮助你来找漏洞，帮助你来修补漏洞？包括如何帮助大家培养自己的人才？我觉得武器不是万能的，对吧？今天给你卖了再多的安全产品，如果我们最后每个单位基础设施不能建立起自己的这种核心的网络安全应对力量，不能建立起自己的安全应对体系，不能建立起自己的靶场，不能建立自己的培训体系，那么你只是买了一堆产品，你就梦想能应对网络战，这是不现实的。所以310今天也讲，我们把这个思想分享给大家。我们未来可能不卖产品，我们只是安全服务的搬运工。所以最后讲一点，既然310有了它一个明确的定位，那么我也最后讲一点 ISC。我们今年有一个最大的变化，大家知道 ISC 过去是我们的一个企业自己的一个自娱自乐的会，后来我们的客户多了，变成了我们的客户会，变成了我们的合作伙伴会，但是它依然是一个企业自己为了做销售举办的会议。但是今年我们其实310重新确立了自己在党政军企的定位，重新确立了自己在政企市场里的这个角色，所以我们觉得所有的同行都可以是我们的合作伙伴，所以我们要把 ISC 变成像亚洲的 ISC， 变成一个平台的会议，变成一个所有厂商都能够来同场竞技，都能够去宣传你的产品，都能够去讲你的理念的会。我们也希望 ISC 能够打造一个创新的生态，所以这次我们免费的邀请了中国所有的这个安全的创业公司，不需要交任何费用，都可以来这免费办展，可以参加我们的沙盒创新大赛。我们的一个目标，310做好310的大数据，大家做好大家的这个各个创新的产品，我们团结起来。虽然我们都是民间力量，但是通过军民融合，通过跟国家网络力量的合作，我们使我们中国的网络安全不被其他的网络战所攻击，使我们老百姓的幸福生活，使我们的社会安宁得以保障。谢谢大家。
谢谢周总，感谢您跟我们分享您来花如此大成本
没有
举办
超时，
ISC
大家可以及时吃饭了。谢谢大家。
我觉得大家在现场啊不吃饭就冲着您来的，所以我想请周总啊，既然您是主办方，那您来给我们做今天上午主论坛的一个总结陈词。今天上午这么多国际级嘉宾的演讲，谁让您的观点印象最深刻？您最深刻的感受是什么？
你就别难为我了，我一上午都在紧张的准备我的 PPT。但是上午呢，通过同声传译听了很多专家。我觉得很多专家的观点，我要回去仔细研究，但我都同意一个观点，就是他们跟我的一个观点是一样的，就是网络安全对人类无论是经济无论社会的威胁越来越大。还有不管我们是大国是小国，是以色列、新加坡这种国家，还是俄罗斯、中国这种国家，我们必须在网络安全要携手、要交流，要共同来应对网络战对人类命运共同体的威胁。谢谢大家。
好，谢谢。感谢周总如此精彩演讲啊！看来每个人都关心自己，但是我想周总在做自己 PPT 的时候，仍然非常关心我们现场每一位嘉宾的精彩演讲。 正如周总所说，今天我们通过 IC 平台，也希望为各位构建一个关注互联网、关注网络大安全时代的一个人类命运共同体的这样一个平台。那上午的精彩演讲到此就要告一段落了，下午会有更多精彩等着大家。欢迎各位呢，待会儿回来，在这里呢，把吃饭的事情重要的给大家宣布一下。待会儿呢，观众就餐是在户外的棚房 ，VIP 在101室和102室的 VIP Lounge， 分别从 B 口和 C 口下电梯到地下1层就餐区。那么以色列专场的冷餐会在2层的大宴会厅 C， 请各位呢中午呢抓紧用餐，也祝各位午餐愉快。下午的我们的主论坛会在1点半钟开始入场，请各位呢抓紧时间，尽早入场。2点钟正式开始我们的议程，所以请各位呢注意好控制自己的时间。感谢各位上午的热情参与，朋友们，我们下午再会。